Alright, well, welcome back. Today I'm going to be working on a new piece for my aircraft kit. So far I've built one of the elevators. I'm about to work on the second one. So now that I have one already built, I can fairly easily, I think, recreate the second one. I've learned a few things during the first, and it turned out okay. So here's my first attempt at it. Everything seemed to have turned out okay. This last cleco is in place here because eventually this control horn will fit inside of there and it will have to be drilled to match. So we've left that last cleco in place, so I have a spot to put that. Obviously we'll be drilling holes down along here as well on both sides and down the back here to hold the control arm in place. So the first step here is to measure and cut this piece of material here down to 37 inches in length. Previously, for other stuff, I'd been marking with these regular Sharpies that kind of have a fat tip on it. It's not as precise as I like, so I went ahead and ordered a couple of some cheap no-name brand Sharpies with a very fine tip on it. So I'm going to try these out and see if I can get it a little more precise than the other one. The other one actually turned out really, really well. Some of the holes for the rivets might be a little bit of, they weren't quite as straight as I would have liked. And mostly, again, because it was kind of hard to figure out where exactly to put the drill bit when you have a line that's this wide instead of one that's only this wide or whatever. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and mark this up at 37 inches. I'll cut it down straight. This is the side that actually is going to have eventually going to have a bevel cut into it to be able to fit the control horn on there. Control horn's up there. And I'm going to keep the other end as straight as possible. That was the factory cut end, so I'm not going to be cutting that at all. That's going to be my point of reference. They're going to cut it a lot straighter than I ever will. So I've got a block of wood here on the end that I'm going to line my yardstick up with. Just make sure that's nice and flat there. Make a little mark right at 37. Mark it again at 37. And in this case, if you cut it a little bit long, that's probably better than cutting it short. So got a nice thin line all the way around. The next thing we're going to do then is to cut off this section. So whatever this is to here to 37, this is kind of extra material that we don't need for this. It was just pre-cut to a certain size. This will actually pull open to make it easier to get in there with our snips. What I'll do is I'll start off here, I don't know, give it about an inch or so away from the edge. I don't want to snip right at the line the first time because as you begin to snip, what happens is it actually bends the metal. You can see right here that it's already bent this metal down and this up a little bit. And as I get closer to my line, I want to make sure that that doesn't have as much of an effect. As we get closer and get closer to this line, a smaller piece of metal on this end means that it won't warp this part as much. This will be warped more because it has less material to hold it steady. So I'm just going to go ahead and go around, I don't know, about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, whatever that is, away. So you can see this already, how far this has moved out away just from trying to snip it and bend this inside and get to it. It looks all right here still, so I'm going to try and open this up without damaging from this point on. It's going to be easier to cut from this angle over here. I should also note that I've kept the, there's plastic over the top of this. That's what this, the blue and gray here is. It's this plastic sort of vinyl covering that's over the top of it. I keep that on there just because as I'm banging this around on the table and things, it keeps the fit surface from getting damaged. Go ahead and mark this line all the way. So I know where to start and end my cuts. About halfway down that distance between the two now. You can see I'm kind of cutting this sort of close to that line, but I don't want to get right on it. I want to give myself a little bit of space. If you look at the plans closely, you can see that this part that's going to have eventually the diagonal cut through here for the control horn, it's going to overlap a little bit. All of our measurements are done from this far end down over on this side over here. Which is the flat end that goes at the very far end of the elevator and the horizontal stabilizer. So all of our measurements will be done from there. So where we put the strip for the piano hinge and all that across the bottom here, that's going to be measured from this side as well. And then the overhang is going to be over here, and that's the side that we trim once we have it all lined up and put together on our horizontal stabilizer. So I'm just going to keep cutting this. This is much easier to cut the closer I get to this line and make thinner cuts. And another thing I've learned is make sure you don't let this tin snips get all the way to the end where it clips, because that last little bit there actually warps the metal a little bit. If you do, I'll try it on a longer piece here. So if I just trim, don't close the trimmers all the way down, just part of the way, and then you end up with a much straighter line than if I close it all the way. You can see where it leaves these little dents right where the snip ended. So that's what I'm trying to avoid, is not closing the snips all the way, just close to that, but not all the way. Alright, the next step is going to be to measure. Look over here at our plans. We want to measure. Here's where the piano hinge is going to come across, and from that piano hinge, that's where all of that corner is where all of our references are made from. So I'm going to measure in from that corner out here onto the skinny end. I'm going to measure in 4 and 3/8 inches, make a mark there. And then from here to here, 7/16, that's at the top of the triangle, right? So it'll be 7/16 to there, make another mark there, and then just use a straight edge to mark from here to there across the bottom, and then also from here down to here, and then from here down to this corner. Alright, so this is my factory edge right here. I've cut off the other end down here. I don't know if you can see that in the camera or not, but right here's my factory edge. These lines, because it's the factory edge, I trust them to make a straighter line than I do for myself. And if you look at these reference lines here, they line up if I do that. So I'm going to try and just put a little piece of tape to keep these two edges aligned. See how if I do that, it moves slightly. I want to make sure that those are perfectly lined up. So I'm going to put a little piece of painter's tape right across there, just to hold that in place long enough for me to make my marks on the other end and make sure that it stays all lined up. So if you watch, the whole part twists a little bit. And I want to make sure that it's as lined up as possible, so I'm just going to twist it slightly. Yeah, that works pretty good. Alright, so that should hold it in place. So this line is going to go something like this. It should be right here. And that's going to go all the way up to this corner up here. So now we have to take some extra precautions to make sure that we cut this line exactly as close as we can without going over. Definitely don't want to cut into that line because that is the edge of where we want to be. And I don't want to mess this piece up because I'll have to buy a new one of these if I do. Alright, same thing here. I'm going to start cutting my line, but I'm going to give myself a little bit of space between where the cut ends up and my line here. I just don't want to overdo it, so I'm going to give myself a good ½ inch to an inch. If you can see with my hand in here, not how close I'm getting to the line without quite crossing it. Alright, well, I'm pretty happy with that. The cut turned out okay. I don't know if you can see this or not very well, but it's pretty close to the line all the way around. I didn't go over in any spots. I've left a little bit of space on the end so that if I need to push the control horn out a little bit, I still have a 1/16 of an inch all the way around or something like that. But if I don't, if I need to end up putting it in here, that's okay as well. I can just cut off the end when the time comes. I'd have to put this on, actually connect this to the horizontal stabilizer before I'll know exactly where it needs to sit. The next step is to mark off where we're going to do some hole drilling for these ribs that are going to go inside of the part here. So there's a couple of spots we have to mark. We have to mark both the holes that we're going to drill and drill them. And then we also need to mark off a line across here all the way around, the same distance all the way around. And once we have that marked, what we'll do is slide this inside of the part, and to the point where the holes are drilled, we'll have a line here that's going to show through, that's going to show us exactly in the middle of those holes, and that will be where the holes will be drilled all the way through the entire part, and then rivets will be put into place to hold that in place. So I'll go ahead and start with these parts here, and the 1/4 inch is measured from the flat end here across the top of the rib. If you measure from here, it may be slightly different you can see that, and maybe you can't see it, but this edge has been bent slightly farther. Maybe it wasn't quite centered exactly when they put it into the press that created the part and made the folds here. But this is the edge we care about. We want that to be exactly a 1/4 inch from the edge of this. Just make a couple of little marks along here. Alright, and then if you ever look at the videos that Sonex has on their website, there's a really good video on how to do this so you make your line straight and it's always in the right spot. Find where your pen touches the mark that you just made, and then just drag the piece along. It will always be in the right spot. It's a nice, easy, short one here. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on our second rib. There's 2 of them. One that goes on the edge and one that goes in the middle here. Don't even have to change the tool here. We're just going to do a 1/4 inch mark all the way down the edge. Alright, so I'm just going to go ahead and mark this at 17 3/4 from the edge. 17 3/4. 17 3/4. Again, I'm measuring from the side that was cut originally by the factory that I know to be a straight corner, not the one that I cut out down here. Alright, it's marked for where the holes are going to be drilled. Now I'm actually, well, at least the center of the holes. That's where I want that line to line up. I want all my rivets to be in the right spots. Alright, after consulting the plans, my first hole is going to be a 1/2 inch from this top up here. That's where my first hole is going to be drilled, where this little plus is. And then it says to do 10 spaces, so there's going to be 11 holes drilled at 1 inch apart. 1, 2, 3. So here's my first one, 1 inch, 2 inch, 9 inches, and 10 inches. So that should give me 10 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, each an inch apart, which means that I'm going to have 11 rivets going into the top of that rib. It's going to go in the middle here. And on the bottom, for 9 inches. Alright, so the way that I found this spot to begin is that this needs to be right in the middle of a piano hinge. I've been using my ruler here as a device to hold it, sort of a template to hold it just far enough away. The instructions say to have it 1.5 millimeters away from the bottom edge of this. So I've got a couple of 2x4s here underneath just to make sure I get my alignment proper. And I put this here, which is a little bit more than, it's like 1 3/4, or I'm sorry, 1 3/4 millimeter thick. But remember, this has stuff on it that will peel off anyway, so that'll make it to within tolerances where I'll be happy with it. If I were to do this, you can see that'll put us right in the middle of our piano hinge, and that's where we want our first hole to be. And the instructions tell us to go 9/16 inches between each of these holes. Alright, and that should put us right in the right spot for those holes. Middle one's done, we just have to do the same thing with the one on the end. Measuring the exact same way. Alright, I have all my holes marked on the end as well as in the middle, all the way around. And now it's just a matter of drilling it out to my size 40 drill bit. Now these ones that are right here along the edge where I'm going to be drilling for the piano hinge, I'm not going to drill those right now. I'm going to drill the piano hinge all at once, and I'll just know that when I put this together, it's going to go into the hole where the piano hinge hole is, so that I don't have to worry about trying to measure and all that stuff. I'm just going to drill it all at once right through this and into the rib once the rib's in there and attached with clecos. You may notice that I'm dancing my drill around a little bit. When I start to drill, sometimes it'll start to walk a little bit, and I'm just pointing it in the right direction. I want to make sure these holes are exactly centered where I want them. So it's more important for me to get that hole drilled in the right spot than it is to worry about whether or not the hole is diagonally cut for now. One thing to make sure you don't do is push too hard as you're drilling through this, because once it breaks through, you don't want to be drilling into the back side of the material, or you're going to weaken it in that spot. My first hole, it actually went through a bit and it hit pretty hard, and I looked inside and it hit the chuck up here on this instead. It still made a little bit of a scratch here, but that was just in the plastic coating. It didn't make it all the way through into the metal, so I'm okay with that, as long as it doesn't drill through and actually hit the metal in the back. So what I'm going to do is sink my drill bit back a little bit farther, just to make sure that it doesn't go all the way through and then hit something on the back side. I'm going to end up damaging something I don't want to damage. Alright, so in one of these middle ones I actually tried my, my hole marker. I'm going to try this on the rest of these too and see if it works out a little bit better or not. Basically what this does is it just scores a small hole right in the center where I want it to be, and I can set it before I punch it down. I was a little bit concerned at first that it might actually dimple the material, but it looks like it's doing a pretty good job of not doing that. So. Yeah, so using the center punch seemed to actually make it a little bit better. Maybe that's something you want to try when you're doing yours. This last one has the skinniest part, and that will definitely go all the way through and hit. Make sure that I don't push too hard, because I don't want it to damage the inside of the control surface here. Now it turned out not too bad. I'm happy with that. Right on the marks. I won't be drilling out this spot right here. This is for the piano hinge, so I won't be drilling that one this time, just the other three. So I'm holding my hand behind this right now because I don't want to, there's not as much material here on this end. I don't want to crease this at all. So I'm holding it from the bottom to make sure that I don't bend the skin material. I just got to go in and deburr a little bit on the inside here, just enough that I can put these ribs in place and they're not going to be, sitting on top of burrs and pushing this material away from it. They probably used a shear to cut this before they ground it and put the teeth onto it, but it has a slightly rounded edge here. I'm going to use that side down on the material here so that I'm not digging gouges into it. I'm not going to do a really deep deburr job here. I just want to try and make sure that this is sort of flat so that when I put this into place, it doesn't sit up on top of a burr. Got a Scotch-Brite pad here. I'm just going to kind of do the inside of this with, kind of clean it up a little bit more. Try not to bend it if possible. be able to see right where those lines are, right through the holes. Through here. You can see the line just starting to show through. Right there. So that's where I would put in a cleco. Same thing up here on this end. You can see they've got a line right here lined up right in the middle. But what I want to do is actually move this as far forward as I can, because I actually want this corner up here as tight against that as I can get it. I'm going to get this line right in the middle, right where I want it. I'm going to push this guy back as far against this as I can. I'm going to drill right into that piece. So this corner right here is probably the most important one in this entire part. To make sure that that's pressed up against this end, and then this one I'm going to do the same thing and make sure it's pressed down against this exactly. Otherwise, the rest of this isn't going to sit flat. You may end up with a small buckle right here. Like if I had drilled this with a 1/16 of an inch out from here, when it's all sucked in together with a rivet, it would have put a little bend right here, which we want to avoid. Go ahead and drill down right here into this one. Alright, so if you look at this, you'll see that this line isn't in the middle of this hole, and that's because the hole is drilled just a little bit farther to the edge than the rest of these are. But you'll notice that the line pretty well lines up all the way down the seam, all the way down to the end over here. Yeah, that turned out very nice. I'm happy with that. Alright, just going to continue drilling these. I'm going to do one down here on the end. It's flat all the way down. And you can feel, as you run your finger along it, exactly how far away this is from the very edge. I've sunk it in just barely, maybe a 32nd of an inch, you know, fingernail width inside, just in case I need to move this in or out a little bit. It's still got plenty of strength from the rib here. But on the same token, if I need to shave this down just slightly, I can always put a file on the end of that without destroying the part. I'm always giving myself just a little tiny bit of play just in case I need it. Yeah, so I'm going to keep drilling these out every other hole or so. Yeah, this is turning out nice. Alright, then I'm going to lift this board up this direction so that I can actually do the other side without my clecos running into the table. So you actually need, I don't know, there's 2.5 inches or something like that. Once you get this clecoed into place, you can actually just push this just a, you know, fingernail's width's distance between the edge of the rib and the edge of the skin here. Even if it doesn't quite line up with my marks exactly, I'd rather have a little bit of play that I can, you know, clean this up if I want later on. It's going to be a little more tricky to get this into place, so I'm actually going to open this a little bit, hold this in place while I drill this one and put clecos in it, just to hold that in place. And then just to make sure that I don't mix these up, I'm just going to write end on this. And that way when I actually go to put this all together, I'll know which one is which. Eventually I'm going to paint this as well with some self-etching primer, and that self-etching primer will keep the metal from holding on to any moisture that gets between the two pieces of metal and could cause some corrosion between the two. I won't do that until my very last step though. So I'll set this one aside for now. And I want this corner to be exactly pressed in and exactly where I want it. Everything else is going to be according to this corner, which may be a little bit tricky. You know what, I'm going to get a tool to help me put that in place. So I have these little C-clamps that I've put furniture moving pads on. Down on the corner, there's just little felt pads that have some adhesive on them. And that's just to keep things from getting damaged. Just want to make sure that it's butted up against this as flat as possible. Alright, try to hold this all together while I make a hole. So this is the hardest part, is getting this rib to line up in the middle. I had the same difficulty with the last one that I did. It's just a little bit tough to get perfectly centered. Pretty darn close, but there we go. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with that being right down the middle. I don't even know if you can see all this or not. But it's good enough here on this side. The other side, on the other hand, like, I don't see the line anywhere, which means that it's probably sitting in there kind of crooked this way or this way. So I'm going to try and get this lined up on the top here. Let me just look down here. Yeah, that actually all looks pretty good there. I'm going to put one more in this spot right here, right in the corner, just to make sure it's holding right where I need it to be. Now I've got to figure out which way to move the rib inside of here to make it line up here. So I guess it probably needs to go from my right to my left. Yeah, sure enough, that was the right direction. These lines are now just very faint, but you can see that there's a black line there, a black line there. Looks like it's moved slightly a little bit up here towards the top. I'm going to have to tap it over as I put these in. But this bottom one down here is pretty darn close to being lined up with the line. It maybe need to go just slightly to from the right to the left here. It's really darn close. But I'm going to start up here on the top because I think that's the more critical angle up there. So I'm going to tap this one over to the side a little bit until it gets in there. Alright, well, I'm happy with where those turned up. I'm just going to go ahead and install our other rib again. Finish the drilling that I started there. Next on the list is my piano hinge that goes across the bottom here. I'm going to go ahead and drill that out first using my drill template that I mentioned before. Alright, I have my hinge cut to the right length according to the instructions. I'm supposed to mount this 1.5 inches away from the end of the flat side, not the side that has the bevel in it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. And that is where my piano hinge is going to sit. Up against that. And I'm going to use my long yardstick here as a measuring device to hold it so that it's exactly the right distance away from, keep the hinge where it's supposed to be, which is not exactly lined up flat with the top of the elevator, but it's going to be about 1.5 millimeters off of that. That first hole is always the hardest one to get in because you got to hold so many things in place. Once you get clecoing here, that becomes much easier to hold the rest in place. So this hole is going to go through the piano hinge, into the skin, into the second piece of skin, and then into the rib as well. So I'm going to make sure that I have this all lined up as tight as possible in the right spot. Go ahead and put a cleco in there. That should go through all 3 parts. And hold this all nice and sturdy now. So I'm holding down with my thumb, pushing it down so that it keeps it nice and level with this 2x4. And then you've got the ruler here on top, and then the piano hinge just touches the top of that. You might be able to see it down here a little bit better. I'm just making sure that that's all lined up all the way across. Should mention that before I started connecting this and drilling it, I made sure that I deburred the back end of that just so it sits flat and there's no question about it whether it's going to be straight when I'm drilling. It's nice and flat against there. Just a quick job, just enough to get any burrs off the back that are going to keep it away from touching the back here. Alright, so I've drilled all of these going from the flat end, gone in 1.5 inches from there. I've gone all the way up here to this middle rib. And I feel good about that. These ones that go from the middle rib all over to the end, I was a little bit nervous about starting to drill those because this piece can actually slide down inside of this slightly. And so what I've done is I've put the control horn back here on the other end. Let's see if you can see that. I've braced it here with a 2x4 to make sure that it's in the right spot. And I'm just going to go ahead and start drilling this now that I know that this is going to hold its dimension this direction. I think the key that I wanted to get across here is that I'm using the control horn here to make sure that my spacing is correct for the height of this before I start drilling this, because otherwise you're drilling through the piece of the outer piece here as well as the inner piece here, and if that's not correct you may not be able to get this control horn into place. Next step is to drill this out to 1/8 inch, put in the gold clecos, and then remove it all and deburr once again, and then start riveting. Alright, well here we are 2 days later. Yesterday, instead of working on the actual airplane part, I noticed that my desk, or my workbench here, had a little bit of a bow in it. Basically, if I'm looking at it from this direction, it kind of had a bow like this. And so my 2x4s were a little bit crooked on there, and my parts, I wish I would have realized this before, I think are slightly askew, just barely, but enough that I'm not super happy about it. Anyway, so I've gone ahead and fixed that. I put a couple of extra supports underneath to keep it flat, a couple of 2x4s that I cut. Going across this way to keep it flat that direction. And then I also ran all of my 2x4s that I'm laying parts on top of, these ones, I ran them through my bandsaw. My bandsaw has a nice little guide here, a locking guide, so I can make it very exact and duplicate the same cut over and over and over. And so that's what I did. I ran all of my blocks, every 2x4 that I have up here on the desk, I ran through on both sides to get a nice flat edge on both ends. So they sit flat and that they all match exactly the same width. So that's what I did yesterday. Alright, what I found when I was working with the first elevator was that using a pair of scissors for this, kind of peeling it back and then just trimming it with scissors seemed to work pretty well. I'd considered the idea of using like a box knife or something like that, but I don't want to score the skin here at all. The Sonex uses a monocoque design, which means that it uses the skin as a stressed member to make the parts more sturdy and strong. And if you put a little cut anywhere on the surface, you actually weaken the spot there, and it actually creates a fail point. I'm just cutting off the parts where I have to get access to the metal to be able to put things together. But for the most part, I want to leave the plastic on to keep it protected from as parts are moved around the garage and bumping into things. Alright, I've gone ahead and done a quick little spray can job on the primed it using this self-etching primer. It's an automotive spray, but it is meant for going directly on metal, so you don't need to etch it in order to make the primer stick to it. Alright, the paint is dried, and I'm going to go ahead and insert these. Once again, I've marked inside what part it is. In this case, this is the middle rib. Over here I've got my end rib. Just going to make sure they go in the right spots. Obviously the end's going to go down here in the end. The middle's going to go here in the middle. So I'm just going to re-cleco this, and then it'll be time to start putting in rivets. Everything has been deburred and should be ready to go. Alright, after several attempts of trying to get this the part in the inside to fit and then be able to put this lip over the top of the bottom part here, I figured out the best way to do this is to put a cleco down here in the bottom and the farthest part away from this, and then push this thing over into place with my ruler. Alright, so that's lined up here on the top. I can start putting these clecos in to their proper holes now. This one should go in fairly easily. It's just here on the edge and it's already kind of lined up. So I've gone ahead and put the control horn into place here. It's not riveted or anything. I'm just trying to hold its dimensions and make sure that it stays flat against the table here. And it feels like it's pretty good right now. Hopefully once I get the piano hinge in place, it'll hold its shape still and continue to stay straight. Alright, well that feels pretty straight, so I'm going to go ahead and start working on the riveting. I'm less than happy with this rivet. It sort of broke off before it actually made a, like you can see the rest of these, they kind of, the shaft breaks off inside of the rivet. This one's broke off outside. Not entirely sure what I'm going to do about that yet. I'm just going to leave it for now. Pull the rest of the rivets. I've only got one more to go on this rib. And I'm not going to drill all of these out, so I assume I can just kind of file that off and then drill out just the rivet itself, pop it out, and maybe do another one. so I've looked around a little bit. I can't seem to be able to figure out how to get this out. So my best option, I think, is to just use a file and kind of clean off the end of this without hitting the material here at all. Not really sure how to go about doing that without damaging anything. What I'm going to do is put some tape, I think, around it so that I'm only filing the rivet itself and not the skin. I definitely don't want to damage the skin over this. So. Sure how to make this thing stop spinning here. Maybe I'll try a little tape in there again. Something to kind of give it something to hold on to. Definitely not happy with how that turned out. So the same thing happened in the same spot with another rivet. Not sure if it's because my compressor was a little bit low on air. It didn't really grab very well and pull it out. So I'm not sure what's going on there. This is pretty frustrating. That's the third one in a row that's happened to. There's obviously something wrong with this part here. Well, this is pretty frustrating. 3 rivets I've tried to put in. All 3 have broken off, left a little bit of the stick sticking out, just a little bit. I've had to drill all 3 of them out. And this hole now is much larger than the rivet is, so there's a lot of play in there. I'm not really sure what I'm gonna have to do with that. I'm gonna try and email Sonex tonight and see if they have any thoughts on what I need to do. Hopefully I don't need to buy a whole new skin, because that's going to mean that I'm going to have to buy pretty much everything except for the piano hinge. I'll have to redo the whole thing because they're all drilled together. My assumption, and hopefully I can just put a bigger rivet in that hole to fill it, and it'll just be a little bit different than the rest. Not ideal, but also neither is building an entire new piece. So I guess I'll find out what the next step is.